George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Race riots, attempted pogroms have erupted in England and in Belfast in the north of Ireland. Cities are on fire, mosques under siege, and mobs of young white men and women are roaming around looking for anyone of colour that they can assault. A mob smashed into a Holiday Inn hostel in Rotherham and attempted to set the hotel on fire. At the risk of hundreds of lives, a man made Grenfell, another man-made Grenfell. And Netanyahu has taken to his bunker. It seems like tonight is the night that the great pan-Middle Eastern war begins, and that might be the harbinger of World War III. We'll be diving deep into that. The attempt at a fascist coup to overthrow the elected government in Venezuela has failed, and the masses of the Chavista Bolivarian movement have taken back control of the streets from the US-paid mercenaries. And 300 days in Gaza, nothing changes. Another genocidal assault on a number of schools sheltering women and children, and more fires in the tent cities that have become the only shelter for the Palestinian people there. A woman watched her child roast in a blazing fire in her own tent and could do nothing about it. Hell on its way? We'll discuss it tonight because it's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
American viewers, bear with us. We're not used to this. Pogroms, vigilante groups stopping cars, allowing cars driven by white people to proceed, cars driven by black or brown people. No one knows what will happen to them. Mobs of people assaulting anyone of colour that they can find. Attempted lynchings, people being dragged from their cars and ruthlessly beaten, people being stabbed, mosques being besieged, having to be defended by non-Muslim well-wishers and the Muslim congregations within. The police are often nowhere to be found. I don't say that as an attack on them, not entirely in any case. I have vivid memories and can still feel the batons of the miners' strike of 1984-85 when to crush 250,000 of Britain's coal mining community, the entire resources of the state were mobilized and the miners were beaten, bludgeoned into submission. There was no shortage of police then. Every time we showed up at a picket line, we were virtually outnumbered by the massed ranks of Britain's finest in the constabulary. How different the Britain we live in today. People are dragged out of their cars by mobs of youths draped in the St. George's Cross, who's Turkish, by the way, some say even Palestinian, dragged out of their cars and set upon. People have been stabbed. There are stories of people having acid thrown at them. You don't have to look in the crystal ball. You can listen to the videos. The videos taken by the thugs themselves as they say things, women by the way, say things like, let them all burn, what the F do I care, as men burst in through the doors and the windows and set fire to a hotel full of hundreds of people, some of whom believed, that's all I can say, believed to be refugees. There are 0.18% of the people in Britain are refugees. It is a problem, and I myself have adumbrated that problem on here many times at some personal and political cost. We in the Workers' Party disagree with mass immigration. We believe that it beggars the country from which they've come and depresses living standards in the countries that they arrive. We want all refugees to be able to go back to their homes, which is why we say we should stop making war, invasion, exploitation and occupation are the handmaidens of the great refugee flows that have occurred across Africa and Asia and the Middle East over this last 25 years or so. But there are some things that are non-negotiable. And the most important of those non-negotiable terms is this: we will not tolerate pogroms in England or in Wales or in Northern Ireland. There haven't yet been any attempts in Scotland, but no one should rest on their laurels about that. We will not allow anyone in this island to be treated as a subhuman, because especially people of my age who grew up in the shadow of the Second World War, we know where the subhumanization of people ends up. It ends up in the gas chambers at Birkenau, at Auschwitz. We know that genocide is the end of the road for subhumanization of other people. What's non-negotiable is that the legal rights, civil rights, human rights of every single person in this island are exactly the same, however they came here, whenever they came here, whatever colour they are, and however they pray or don't. That's not negotiable. And so the state has a responsibility, an equal responsibility, to defend the lives, to defend the property, to defend the livelihood, to defend the human right to worship. Every person in this island has exactly the same rights. And the state, which I was brought up to believe was in the final analysis an armed body of men, well, where are the armed bodies of men, is what I am asking. It's true that successive governments dramatically reduced the number of police officers that we have in this country. It's also true that they're not as tall or as fit as the police officers we used to face during the miners' strike in 1984-85. Some of them look like Diddy men that would not be able to confront an angry, tight-fisted fascist in the streets of Rotherham, Middlesbrough, or wherever else is kicking off right now. But that's not their fault. It's successive governments that have closed almost all police stations. Our police stations now look like Greg's, the baker, and several of them are now on fire or have been burnt out. The police were not even able to defend their own police stations. The police are doing their level best. I have every reason to believe that. The fire brigade, which is now involved in fighting fires caused by these racist, fascist mongers that are roaming the whole country, it seems, but particularly in the north of England. The police are doing their best to protect people. They're doing their best to suppress these rioters, but there's just not enough of them. Neither has the Prime Minister or the government shown any leadership at all. I begged the question a couple of days ago, will Keir Starmer outlast Liz Truss as Britain's Prime Minister, or even a lettuce in the lifestyle, the life cycle of a lettuce? And for, 48 hours, I began to doubt that he would. He has now surfaced and he has now spoken. but it was too little and too late, and it did not address the underlying and fundamental problem which exists here. The reason that the abandoned cities and towns of the north and the entirely bereft coastal communities with nothing left, no tourists, no business, no industry, no employment, no hope, filled their adrenaline running, fueled entirely on anger and alienation. The blame for that lies with our political class. It's a uniparty, it's a duopoly, it's two sides of the same backside, so I'm not making a particularly anti-Labour or a particularly anti-conservative point here. For 40 years, Britain has been governed by the blancmange of centrism. Neither one thing nor the other, neither conservative nor socialist. It has governed a Britain which has begun in front of our eyes to wither away. Trust in our institutions has withered away. If it's on the BBC, people don't believe it. If a policeman tells you what to do, you simply don't do it, and you might, if you have a brick handy, hit him over the head with it. Our courts, our parliament, above all, our whole system is broken. Britain is broken. And that's under the apparently never-ending rule of centrism. And that has left a lot of dry and despairing human tinder all over the north of this country. It's not so much that they are poor. They certainly don't need to break into Phones R Us in order to liberate the phones as they've been doing. They don't have to break into shoe shops to be properly shod. They don't have to break into the clothes shops that they are now busily looting. I'm not suggesting that kind of poverty. I'm talking about the poverty of hopelessness, the poverty of alienation. And just like, and this for American viewers, please don't be offended, just like the poor whites down in Alabama, the poor whites down in Mississippi, for these people, the only thing, the only spiritual, moral thing that they have in their lives is that they're not black, that they're not brown, that they're not Asian. They can look down on somebody in the way that the British state and its liberal, progressive bubble looks down on them. They've got somebody else that they can look down upon. Even though those communities very often have far more in terms of material, spiritual, familial, community, health and happiness than they do, they still imagine that white is right, that white is might, that the people that look like them are somehow the master race. I'm afraid that's what's happening here in Britain. These hopeless, alienated thugs are roaming around looking for people who don't look like them to set upon. And it's only a matter of time before this becomes a real pogrom. I said this 72 hours ago. People said I was exaggerating. But it's only for the grace of God that someone has not yet been literally hanged. Someone has not yet been literally burned to death in these riots that are happening now. Of course, riots go up like a rocket, they come down like a burned stick, and so will this one. And Starmer meant it. I'm sure he is a former chief prosecutor after all, when he said that they will regret having taken part in this disorder. They will be sent to prison for many, many years. That is to say, if they're treated in the same way that the mainly black people who rioted in Britain in 2011 were treated, or the mainly Asian people who rioted in Bradford several years before that. If they're treated like they were treated, of course we must expect that, mustn't we? Then they will be in prison for many, many, many years. Their leader is sunning himself, sniffing cocaine in a Cyprus hotel right now. Yes, I refer to Stephen Laxley Yennon, or whatever his name is. Tommy Robinson, he'll be better known to you. He's literally in a Cypriot hotel by a swimming pool, sniffing coke at your expense. You idiot, far-right thugs who keep him in the style to which he has become accustomed. He lit the torch and ran away, fled out of London, and is now, he hopes, out of reach in Cyprus. I have a feeling that he'll be back to face the music pretty damned quick. But these people will go to prison for many years. They will never work. It'll be on their records, their personal records, for the rest of their lives, that they set upon a person just because he was black, that they let a car go through just because the driver was white, and they molested, if not abducted, the driver who was black or who was brown. Now, the failure of the police to control this situation, the absence of the British Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, where's she? We understand that the Prime Minister is on a much-needed holiday, and that in any case, he knocks off work on a Friday at 6 o'clock to observe the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath. We understand that. But it's now Sunday night, and there's no sign of any government rallying of the forces of the state to confront what's happening in Britain today at all. Where's the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner? She doesn't knock off on a Friday at 6 o'clock. Far as we know, she's not on holiday, but we haven't seen or heard anything from her. So in the absence of the state and an armed body of men to protect the communities and the individuals that are now at mortal risk, the people are beginning to organize themselves. Now, I have never called for that. I did not want that to happen because I know where it can lead. But if you were a Muslim in Blackburn, if you were a Muslim in Bolton, where there are tens, scores of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands across both towns and cities, would you sit in your mosque waiting for a non-existent police presence to defend you? Would you stay in your home when a firebomb might come through the window at any minute? Or would you organize yourselves and your brothers to defend your community, to defend your families? Well, I'm afraid it's kind of obvious. It's not rocket science. That is what is now happening. And so Britain, this green and pleasant land, is facing the possibility of large rival groups, of attackers and defenders running into each other and pouring more petrol onto the flames. As I say, you can't blame those communities for defending themselves when it appeared that Britain was no longer able, or perhaps was no longer prepared to defend themselves. So much for Britain. A much, much bigger fire is coming tonight. It surely will be tonight. It's a surprise it wasn't last night. It's a surprise it wasn't the night before, because the delay has allowed the United States, the United Kingdom, Jordan, Egypt, the UAE, and all the other allies of Israel to rally to its defense. So it cannot be much longer delayed. We're promised from both Tehran and from the Lebanese resistance movement a retaliation of an entirely new kind. I have some ideas about what that might look like. It might, for example, look like the liberation of the illegally occupied Golan Heights, stolen from Syria in 1967 and occupied by Israel, annexed by Israel ever since. An annexation, an occupation, recognized by absolutely nobody in the world, except Donald Trump, who has a block of flats there called Trump Heights, named in his honor. It might look like a ground invasion of the Galilee. It might look like the actual liberation of parts of occupied Palestine for the first time since 1948 and the original Nakba catastrophe, which sent 800,000 Palestinians spinning into orbit right across the world and settling as refugees, lucky ones in the west and the north, unlucky ones in the refugee camps in the Arab countries nearby. It might look like a ballistic surprise for Israel that it has as its worst nightmare. You see, both Israel and Iran can now be said to be undeclared nuclear weapon powers. Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons. It has never acknowledged them. They have never been inspected. No one in the world, no government in the world even mentions it. We only know about it because the brave Jewish whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu told us about it in Andrew Neil's Sunday Times and has spent the last quarter of a century and more in solitary confinement and imprisonment of various kinds. He's allowed out now, but he's not allowed to go anywhere and he's not allowed to speak to anybody. But now we know, I personally thought I knew for the last few weeks, Iran has nuclear weapons too. And from their point of view, why shouldn't they? Everyone targeting them is a nuclear weapons power. Britain is a nuclear weapons power. France is a nuclear weapons power. The US is a nuclear weapons power. And Israel is a nuclear weapons power. So now there is nuclear parity between Iran and Israel. I don't think the Iranians are, in the first instance, going to target a nuclear weapon at Tel Aviv, but I'm certain that they're going to target a ballistic missile, the ferocity and velocity of which has never been seen in any Middle Eastern war. And I think it's going to land right down the middle chimney of the Israeli Knesset. I believe that the bunker that Netanyahu is presently, right now, sitting in will probably be the only safe place in the whole of the so-called state of Israel. Only place it'll be safe to be. Palestine, I just can't get out my mind the video that I saw this evening of a woman screaming as her child roasted in a blazing tent outside a hospital. I can't get out of my mind the never-ending stream now of hundreds of thousands of maimed, mutilated, murdered children and women being dragged out of burning buildings, being recovered from under the rubble, being carried into hospitals no longer worthy of the name. So destroyed, so enfeebled have they become. 300 days of this, and nobody in the West in power gives a single damn about it. It's going to be a bumpy night tonight, and if there's breaking news, we'll certainly bring it to you. Remember, it's 2 hours later in Palestine than it is here in the UK. Stay tuned. I'll be right back with the one and only Bryce Greene. It's the mother of all talk shows. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, I vowed never to speak about the Olympic Games again, but I guess I'm going to have to because I got to read out this poll. Should trans athletes be allowed to compete as women? Answer yes or no. And 35,180 of you have already voted. You can vote on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please share it with all of your friends on that platform. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'm headed for 500,000 subscribers, and I'm very keen to get there as quickly as possible. It's toll free to call us from the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It is free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081 965522. And the number for the rest of the world is 44203 966 2625. Bryce Greene, a regular guest of ours, a very popular one too, is an independent writer, political analyst, contributor to Fairness. Wouldn't fairness be a fine thing? Bryce, you were probably startled by my description of what's happening in England today because, well, it's the kind of thing that we used to cluck about happening in the United States. Race riots in 2024 in England. Has that news reached you over there yet?
I've only heard the briefest accounts, but it doesn't surprise me that Britain would be having race issues. The entire Brexit campaign seemed to be an example of capitalizing on racial discrimination and racial biases against immigrants and people of color. And this is nothing less than what I would expect from one of the chief countries of what I like to call the white power axis. You know, UK, the United States, and Australia, and all these other European countries that are hell-bent on taking over the world.
Actually, the free movement of foreign labour that was being rejected by the vote on Brexit were all white people. So whatever else it was a rejection of white Eastern European cheap labour, not of people of colour. There are millions of people of colour in our country. Most of them were born there. And if they weren't in the England football team, they'd have gone out in the first round. Everyone is eating in Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi restaurants, listening to black people's music. And every football team in Britain, everyone in England, has at least 2, 3, oftentimes 7, 8 black players in their team. And yet the same people that eat in those restaurants, buy that music, support those football teams, are now roaming around English cities looking for people who look like you to pull out of their car and severely assault. And God forbid, it's only a matter of time before somebody's killed. It's a truly shocking thing for us in Britain. And the fact that we don't have enough cops to defend the places that are under attack is a big wake-up call, a big shock to those that didn't notice the steady reduction in police numbers in Britain over this last period. But you've got your border issues too, don't you? You had a border czar, Kamala Harris, I think she was called. What's happening down there?
Well, here in the United States, it seems that immigration has become a bipartisan issue in which everyone on every side of the aisle agrees that they want to keep the immigrants out. But the immigration crisis is one born of American imperialism, just like many other issues around the world. The fact that America has destroyed countries like Mexico, like Honduras, like Nicaragua, like Venezuela, through sanctions or other forms of economic warfare, has caused a steady stream of migrants headed northward looking for a better life. But the Americans don't seem to care about that. They seem to only care about the issue when it reaches their borders. But if they wanted to stem the tide of immigrants, they could stop destroying other countries. And Kamala, even if she might be offering a alternative to Joe Biden, seems pretty committed to continuing America's role in Latin America, America's role in the rest of the world. One only need look at the recent elections in Venezuela to see how this political system would react to any radical change that would change the conditions of people's lives on the ground in Central America. The Maduro government appears to have won an election, but of course, Western imperialist powers have been delegitimizing the election, which is what they do whenever an election happens in a country that they don't like. But much like they did under Trump, the U.S. government seems to be trying to recognize the other government, thus contributing to the political destabilization, justifying another round of economic sanctions, which compounds the political situation there. None of this is going to help Venezuela. None of this is going to keep people from wanting to come north. All of it's going to exacerbate the problem. And when people flee in millions and millions, they'll act surprised when they decide to come to America, which, for all its problems, is still a relatively rich part of the world.
It is ironic, isn't it, that a state founded on the mass immigration of settlers who then exterminated the local population, enslaved millions of Africans, should be complaining about invaders coming from the south, given everything you've just said. And I could say even more about the war and depredation they have wrought upon their backyard, as Monroe put it, in the southern part of the American hemisphere. It's as ironic as Britain, which invaded 3/4 of the world. There's only 40 countries in the whole world that Britain has not invaded and occupied, and for centuries in some cases, and was, of course, the biggest trader of slaves to the Americas. Now we're all upset about 0.18% of our population being invaders who've arrived here illegally, like we legally arrived in India or Africa or Asia or the Middle East.
Oh, precisely. It is exactly irony that's what's at play here. One of the funny things, George, is that when I was in elementary school, middle school, learning about our history, we would learn about the Monroe Doctrine. And in America, the Monroe Doctrine is taught to us as a way to protect the Southern Hemisphere or the Western Hemisphere from European colonialism. There was no mention of American colonialism. There was no mention that the fact that the U.S. is claiming all of these countries is a way for them to exploit their resources and change the governments and extract as much wealth as possible. But that's the sort of history that people are grown up with. And so it's no surprise that they have these skewed ideas about whose land it is and who's an invader and who belongs here. And I'm certain that the educational system over there in the UK is equally as skewed towards, again, this white power axis. These narratives of whose land it is and who's in the right. And well, do Indians belong here? Did Britain legally go into India? All of these questions have real historical answers, but educational systems in many countries around the world spend a lot of energy in trying to obscure this reality and in trying to play on people's nativist sentiments. And I think based on what you're telling me, that's what we're seeing in the UK right now, these roving gangs of the ignorant fighting the enemy that they've been told is replacing them. But it's all nonsense, and it's all based on the original sin of the colonialist empire.
Now, are your people aware that tonight probably a conflagration will begin and that your government, whoever they are, we don't actually know who's running things in Washington right now, your government has sent 4,000 Marines, sent your warships to the Eastern Mediterranean, which can only mean an intervention in the war that's about to break out. overnight tonight. Are the American public aware that their sons and presumably some daughters are steaming towards their own death for Israel, and how do they feel about it?
Well, as usual, most of the American public doesn't quite understand what the issues at stake are. They understand that Israel's under attack and that Israel's an ally, and so America needs to defend their ally. However, what's little discussed here is just how precarious the situation in the Middle East is, and just how destructive Israel's role in the Middle East is. People don't see the fact that Israel, in its entire colonial enterprise and its entire enterprise of occupation in Gaza and the West Bank, is at the root of the current war that we see now. They don't see that Israel's insistence on expansion into the Golan Heights, into the West Bank, into other areas, is why the surrounding Arab states don't approve of their continued aggressive behavior. And they certainly don't understand how endangered Israel is right now. There's this myth that Israel is an iron fortress backed by Big Brother, the United States, but that seems to be increasingly blowing up in their face. Many Israeli generals seem to understand that they can't really fight a war on two fronts against Hezbollah and Hamas. They're only recently now acknowledging the ammunition and tank shortages that have been resulting from their war against Hamas. Those challenges will only be compounded when 30,000 Hezbollah fighters are up against the IDF. And those problems will only be further compounded if Iran sends troops to get involved. And again, they'll be further compounded if the Houthis decide to send more missiles, which, as we've seen over the last few weeks, are very capable of hitting Tel Aviv. So there's this myth of American invincibility, of Israeli invincibility, and it's slowly being shattered. But if America allows Israel, and I do say allow because they have the ability to stop it, but if America allows Israel to start this broader war in Lebanon and Iran, and to continue bombing sovereign nations, then they're in for a rude awakening. It seems to be another example of this irony we're talking about, this ignorant irony, that the biggest people who are pushing for an agenda that would lead to the destruction of Israel happen to call themselves Israel's biggest supporters. They happen to be the settlers, the ultra-ideological Zionists who are pushing for a broader expansion into war. But as we've seen in the case of South Africa or any dying empire, lashing out this way is really the surest path to destruction.
Lastly, Bryce, I'm grateful for your time on a busy, busy evening. How's the election going? What's your current reading of who's going to be president?
Oh, goodness. I'm not following the horse race as closely as many people, mostly because I don't find the difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump to be as significant as some other people seem to believe. There was a time when the Democrats were talking about how Trump is a threat to democracy and a threat to the rule of law. Of course, all of that's true, but they don't seem to believe that anymore. They seem to be getting highly offended at the idea of someone wishing death on Trump, which if they were a threat to democracy, well, then you would think that that wouldn't be so controversial. But no, they pivoted from calling Trump a threat to democracy to him being weird and Republicans being weird, which, again, is true, but it ignores how much of a threat to democracy Democrats are and how weird Democrats are. And so while I am on the side that believes that Kamala Harris would be far less destructive, or at least slightly less destructive than Trump would be, at least on the domestic front, the differences between the two, especially on the foreign policy side, in which millions of lives hang in the balance, in which thousands of people are being massacred every year under the U.S. watch, that doesn't seem to change under Kamala. It didn't seem to change under Biden, and it won't change under Kamala. Didn't change under Obama. Didn't change under Clinton or any Democrat. And so these issues of which person is in the White House at any given moment seems to be secondary than to the question of who controls American foreign policy. And that question is, the major corporations, the ideologues, the imperialists, the people who want to see American power projected at any costs. And that's true regardless of the color of the party that's in office, blue, red, it doesn't matter. And so I believe that many Americans should instead focus on how they can build alternative power so that by 2028, we won't have a question of which genocidal freak we're going to put into the White House. And maybe it'll be a question of whether or not this country is going to be a democracy, whether or not it's going to represent its people, whether or not it's going to keep massacring people all around the world. And so that's the long-term political project that I think people ought to be focused on. The horse race might be interesting in its own right, but at the end of the day, it's just going to an office and clicking a button. It's not really political activity.
Thanks for that, Bryce Greene, independent writer, political analyst and contributor to Fairness. Thanks for your time. Now, violence is erupting in Middlesbrough and Rotherham again as we speak. Riot police are dealing with serious disorder for a third night, and the fire brigades too, and the other emergency services. So you're reacting in your thousands to the UK riots, and we're taking your calls on the violence last night and the night before, and the incidents underway this evening. That's coming up right now. While I take a short break, you stay tuned.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq War. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
Now, there have been many horrific sights on social media, and I suppose one or two of them made it onto the mainstream media, but not couched in the correct way for the most part, I'm also willing to bet. But none has been as ugly as the besieging of the Holiday Inn in Rotherham, in which presumably hundreds of people were ensconced and had no way out because the people who wanted them dead were completely surrounding the hotel. And then, when windows and doors were smashed in, a deliberate raising of fire, which, if it had caught fully ablaze, would have meant the incineration of everybody in that hotel, whether tourist or migrant or member of staff or firefighter or police officer. Who could possibly know what the outcome of that would be? And yet 700 people were involved in doing it, including a disturbing number of women and even a disturbing number of children. 10 police officers at the hotel were injured. There have been 147 arrests so far across the last 3 days, which is a remarkably low number, but that reflects the low numbers of police officers. But of course, all of that will be on camera, and people will be being arrested over the next weeks and months as they go through the footage. Fights are going on with the police in Middlesbrough and Rotherham right this moment. One hotel in Rotherham was attacked, housing asylum seekers. Last night, the Mercure Hotel in Bristol was attacked too. But police and anti-fascist protesters held the attackers back. Amanda's on the line in London on this very subject. Amanda, what would you like to say?
Hello, good evening, Mr. Galloway. We seem to have a completely and utterly ineffectual Prime Minister. I'd just like to ask you, somebody who I have a great admiration for, what you would do if you were Prime Minister in these circumstances.
Well, I think that I would have empowered thousands of voluntary constables and sent them into the front line, because quite obviously we don't have enough police officers. We don't have enough police stations. In fact, we've got less than a tenth of the police stations that we had 20 years ago. Imagine that. 9/10 of them have been sold as luxury flats. And those that we've got, we can't protect. I'm sure, like me, you've seen at least 2 police stations on fire over the last 3 days. So I would have empowered special constables, thousands of them, and sent them with police powers to defend the communities, the individuals, the institutions, particularly mosques, but also community centres and other civil society assets. I would have done that. And if that could not be done, I would have called on the armed forces, because this moved from being a riot, was never a protest, but that's what they still call it. In fact, the BBC called it this evening a pro-British protest. Like the people in the street being hunted down are not British. What kind of mentality is that? But there were never protests, but they were riots. But they moved from being riots to being acts of terrorism the minute that hotel in Rotherham went up in flames. So I'd have mobilized members of our armed forces to defend the population that the police could not properly defend. Of course, we have to deal with all the underlying issues that lie beneath this. But you cannot do that when people are in fear of their lives. When their houses, their shops, their kebab houses, their cafes, their mosques, their community assets are in danger of being overwhelmed and set afire at any minute. So it's not that I'm oblivious, hardly, to the underlying conditions here, but we have to make everybody safe in this country. No one can be allowed to be made more unsafe than anyone else by the colour of their skin. Back to you, Amanda.
Yes, it's extremely complex, as you say. There's so many underlying issues that percolate, people whose lives have not been fulfilled, and I think that sectarianism is incredibly dangerous. And if you, Mr. Galloway, can do anything to try and cross the divide, I think that would be unbelievably important.
Thank you, Amanda. Most kind. If I were in Parliament, I'd be demanding its recall right now. As a matter of fact, I am demanding its recall. In the middle of all of this, not only did the Prime Minister have his bags packed with no inclination to unpack them, the entire Parliament is on holiday while Britain is burning. It's a kind of madness. Recall Parliament right away and deal with this whole matter in the round. That's what I say. Amanda, thanks for that first call. Anthony Wedgwood says, I've been saying for 15 to 20 years that the largest form of racism has always been towards Muslims here. Various comment sections and posts on social media over the years, yet we are told anti-Semitism is rife. I'll tell you what, if what's been happening to black and brown people over the last 3 days had, God forbid, been happening to Jews in England, this would have been a global emergency. the United Nations, NATO would be involved to bring it to an end. Matthew Wren says the riots in the UK remind me of the race riot mobs of the 1980s and before. Matthew, it's much worse than that. Dan Eccles says, strange that you don't make a difference between good Muslims and radical Muslims. What does that even mean, Daniel? There's another Daniel on the line in New York. He wants to talk about the UK riots. What a change, Danny. Americans are phoning us to talk about riots in the UK. Who'd have thunk it? Go ahead.
Yes, sir. God bless your country and God bless all of your Britain citizens, whether they're black, green, purple, rainbow colored or whatever. If they hold the Union Jack on their shoulders, then what I've seen in the last week, and I keep a pulse. I keep a pulse on what's happening in the world. And it's unfortunate that a protest movement of people being upset leads to who knows who they are, who firebomb structures, bodegas. You got kids. I watched a stream last night where the streamer was yelling. There's kids up in the building. There's kids up in the buildings. You got protagonists and ops through every side of the coin. On the MLD side or the Muslim Defense League or whatever, no one's talking about that. MDL. But you got patriots who are being infiltrated. And I say patriots very loosely as far as just loving your country, not no matter what color or creed you are. And it's unfortunate. And I pray for all the good people of Britain the last 2 nights. And I hope to gosh you guys can resolve the issues and the reason why I felt the need to call was because my people in the States here, what is happening across the sea is going to happen here. Give it a year. Give it a year and a half. Just like the
it quite often happens there. But I must take issue with your description of people on these videos as patriots. We don't actually have to question their motivation or who they are. They're telling us on their own videos. They're talking openly about if we can't get the Pakis, we'll get their shops and their kebab houses. If we can't burn them, we'll burn their businesses. They're telling you openly, they're looking for black people. They have attempted to lynch black people. One man in Manchester, a black man, not visibly a Muslim black man, just a black man. They tried to lynch him. 20 of these self-described, self-defined patriots wanted to lynch a black man in Manchester just because he was black. That's all. No other reason. Olga Rykov says it's not about race. Assimilation and not raping children does not require migrants to change their race. Well, most of the people raping children in Britain are white British people. Didn't you know that, Olga? How stupid are you, Olga? Do you think most of the people raping children, raping women, involved in bestial practices like the BBC chief news reporter who went to prison 2 days ago, do you think he's a migrant? Do you think Sir Jimmy Savile was a migrant? You think Gary Glitter was a migrant? You think Rolf Harris was a migrant? Why are you watching this show with views like that? You disgust me. There are no riots in Scotland. Fact. Caroline, don't be so stupid. Do you think there's not anyone in Scotland who would get involved in these kind of riots? Seriously? You ever been at Tynecastle? You ever been on the slopes of Ibrox Park? Enough with your stupid Scottish nationalist exceptionalism. This vileness has happened in England, where 50 million people live. It has happened in the north of Ireland, where 2 million people live. It has not yet seriously happened in Wales, and it has not happened in Scotland yet. So quit dancing on Britain's grave, you stupid separatist. Greg is in Essex on these riots. Go ahead, Greg. Greg, are you there? Did I put you off?
No, I'm still here, George.
Greg, you're on the air, I think. Yeah, go on,
hello,
brother.
George. Hi. Hi, I happen to agree with a lot of stuff, George. But in your monologue and your
I know there's a
speech,
butt coming here, Greg.
Yeah, there is a
I know
but.
there's a butt coming here, Greg, so get on with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, George, there is a but. Yeah. In your monologue and your opening speech, you mentioned nothing about the Asian men roaming the streets with tools, with blades.
What Asian men?
With hammers.
What? No, stop. Stop. What Asian men are roaming the streets? Do you mean the Asian men that today are defending their communities because for the last 2 days, nobody else was defending them? Is that the ones you mean?
George, unless their community involved Marks and Spencers and the likelihood of a high street being their mosque, I doubt it very much.
Well, tell me about these Asian men that are roaming around Marks and Spencers and destroying the high street. Tell me.
George, like you, I don't watch TV. I watch social media. And I've been watching a lot of independent media, independent news outlets that are doing their own recording.
Yeah. Share it then. Share it with me. Tell me. I'm asking you for an example.
DJE Media.
No, give me an example of Asian men roaming the streets, trashing Marks and Spencer and the high street. Give me one.
Yes. Yesterday, I wasn't sure. I'm not sure if it's in Stoke or Manchester, George. There's definitely footage online.
Footage online of Asian men trashing Marks and Spencer?
No, being held up by the same police line of the same British taxpayer on the other side. Being kept apart.
Well, first of all, this is a false dichotomy. These people that you describe as Pakistani are British. You know, like Jude Bellingham was English when he scored that last-minute goal that stopped you getting knocked out of the Euros in the first round. You remember? That kind of British. Black British. Brown British. What you really mean is white British, right?
No, British taxpayer is what I said, George.
Taxpayer. I'll tell you what, Greg. I looked at a lot of footage in the last 3 days, and most of the knuckle-dragging, beefy-faced, fat, pot-bellied, knuckle-dragging scum that I saw looking for Pakis and black people to attack have never done a day's work in the last decade. That's my bet. They've never paid a penny in tax, Greg, because they're scum. Scum of the earth, the people I've been watching on the videos. What about you? You think they're fine tax-paying? You think they're fine taxpayers?
George, I'm ex-military. I'm an ex-boy soldier like yourself. And I didn't go through with my conditions of joining the army because I feel the same way as you, George. I don't think we should be bombing innocent people. Okay. I happen to agree with you on Palestine. Okay. I don't think we should be bombing innocent people in Palestine. But when you portray...
Good, I'm glad to hear it. But get back to these taxpayers. Get back to this dichotomy. How do you know who pays tax, Greg?
Come on.
Do you think white people pay tax but black people don't?
Sorry?
Do you think white people pay tax but black people don't?
No, of course they do, George. I'm not racist in the least.
Well, why did you bring up taxpayers?
Because everybody on the other side are still paying their taxes, George.
Everybody pays their taxes, and if they don't, actually the people that avoid their taxes, Greg, are the rich people that are laughing at all of this. The rich people that own us, own you, own me, own our families, own our land, our country. These people talk about wanting their country back. It's never been their country, Greg. The country is owned by the rich and powerful in our society, who have no colour, except whatever the colour of banknotes is.
I just think you should portray the whole story, because I've seen the footage of these Asian men.
I want to. I'm giving you all this time. I should have cut you off. It's already 8 o'clock, but I'm asking you, give me examples of Asian men trashing high streets this weekend. Give me one example. Just one.
Take a look at DJE Media and the footage that he's showing, George. How about Joe Vlogs as well?
Why don't you send it to us? We'll put it on. You send it to us. Send it to the show. Send it to me and we'll put it on the screen. Okay?
Do that right now, George. Give me an email, please.
No, just send it to me. Tweet it to me now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I shall exit to you as we speak, as I get off the line. Thank you, George.
All right. Now, I don't know if I've got to take a break now. My blood's up. I don't want to. We've had terrific numbers again this week on the podcast. Again in the top 10 in China and again in the top 10 in Pakistan. And get this, we nearly broke into the top 100 in the United States of America. Oh, so if you're watching in the States, please download it. We must get in to the American Billboard Top 100, mustn't we? It's like the Beatles. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen right now. Coming up after the break, it's Jackson Hinkle, the man himself. Stay tuned.
As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire.
Jackson Hinkle was the first American to congratulate President Nicolas Maduro on his thumping victory in the Venezuela presidential elections. He's also one of the leaders and founders of a new political party in America, the American Communist Party. We'll talk to him about both of those things. But first, I want to ask Jackson Hinkle if he knows that there's a war on in the Middle East, and 4,000 American Marines are about to be caught up in the middle of it. What's up, Jackson? You're back from your travels, but the world is helter-skelter towards conflagration. Perhaps a very big war indeed. I asked our friend Bryce Greene earlier in the show if Americans even know that their sons and daughters are right in the middle of it. 4,000 Marines off the coast of Lebanon. What could possibly go wrong?
It's absolutely insane what's happening right now, but not surprising, I think, to any American that's been following the news over the past several years. I mean, you'd have to be living under a rock to believe that the American government is looking out for the best interests of the people of this country. Just like in the United Kingdom, I mean, our governments are completely cucked to the financial interests, to Wall Street, to the City of London, Bank of England, so on and so forth, and all of the warmongering cartel of political puppets that they utilize to fund these wars and to carry out these operations. Unfortunately for the West, and unfortunately for their proxy in Israel, I really don't think that this is going to go as well as they do. And, you know, you and I were some of the first people, along with, you know, the notorious Scott Ritter and Colonel Douglas McGregor, who were saying, hey, look, if Israel does in fact try to invade Gaza rather than just bomb the smithereens out of it, their military is going to suffer high casualties. They're going to lose all those Merkava tanks. They're going to be up against a real challenge, and it's going to be more than just a bloody nose that they'll be dealt. And now with the prospects of going up against the Yellowmen in Lebanon and going up against Iran, I mean, it's going to be the end of the end for our proxy in the Middle East, and it's not going to go well at all. Unfortunately, many people are probably going to die in the process. And anything could happen. I mean, this could tip off World War III. We really don't know how deranged, well, we do know how deranged the people are in the West leading this all. I mean, they're willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to try and undercut the Russian economy, even though that's not working, and it hasn't worked for over 2 years now. And now they think they're going to have some political victory here. It's not going to happen.
It's good that you brought Zelensky up, because not only has he cancelled elections and therefore now ruling illegitimately with the full blessing of the United States, which will not accept the result of the presidential election in Venezuela, but not only has Zelensky cancelled the elections, he's just cancelled debt repayments. He's borrowed money from all and sundry, and he's just unilaterally announced that there'll be no debt repayments until October. And if you believe he'll start again paying in October, I've got a bridge in London, I could sell them. This Zelensky-Ukraine love affair has cost your country and mine best part of $1 trillion so far, Jackson.
Well, that's why, as you said, your show is about to reach, top 100 podcasts in America, and it's in the top in your country, and it gives me chills when you say that. But again, that is another thing that should not be surprising to either of us, given how much truth that you have spilled on this matter. I mean, you pointed out exactly right. Zelensky doesn't even have elections. He has no elections. There's no legitimacy to his reign on terror in Ukraine. The people wouldn't reelect him if there were elections today. I guarantee you that's why he's not having elections. That's why he's not signing a peace deal, because a peace deal would bring an end to this martial law that is the legal justification for there to be no elections. And all the while, they're pointing the finger at President Maduro and saying, these elections are not fair, they're illegitimate. Well, they've provided no proof. The Venezuelan elections, I saw them for myself. I was an international observer there. I got to visit countless polling stations in opposition areas and pro-Maduro areas. I was with opposition election observers. The elections were sound, fair, transparent, and free to everyone, okay? They were more transparent and safer than American elections, but we don't even need to address that. All we need to do is look at the hypocrisy about the West sending damn near $1 trillion to Zelensky with no elections, but then moaning and groaning about Maduro, who had the cleanest elections and won with about 6-7% of the vote.
Gayatri and I, we were present in 2012 for Comandante Hugo Chavez's final victory. Chavez won more elections and more referenda than any other political leader alive. Venezuela constantly has elections, has a constitution that they seem rather infatuated with. They are all the time trying to comply with liberal nostrums from countries that have no interest in those things unless they deliver a slave government to Washington. So I asked the other night, I'm asking you now, you were there, so were we in 2012. What's the point in trying to please these people? Why not become like Cuba, a place that cannot be overthrown, a place that cannot be invaded, subverted? When we were there in 2012, Jackson, there was hundreds of thousands of oppositionists marching down the streets. There was umpteen television stations spewing out hate against Chavez. Most of the newspapers were opposition newspapers. And still Chavez won. But nobody ever accepted it, is the point I'm making.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most incredible thing, right? This is the country, Venezuela, with the most oil in the entire world. On the continent, they have the most gas, they have the most golds, they have the most of all these precious mineral resources, aluminum, cobalt, so on and so forth. Okay, so obviously this is a prime target for the United States and all of, the transnational finance capital interests, right? When you look at the situation, the democratic situation on the ground, the opposition has like 8 or 9 parties that ran in this election. Most of them didn't even like the main opposition because they have so many problems with them. The main opposition is very far right wing. They're unpopular. The U.S. just kind of propped them up because the newer wave of these opposition figures like Juan Guaido are stuck in Miami. And they're stealing Venezuelan state assets like Citgo, so they're not allowed to go back to Venezuela. But, this woman, Maria Corina Machado, whatever her name is, she has literally called for the United States to invade Venezuela in a BBC interview in 2019 to remove President Maduro. She also wrote a letter to Benjamin Netanyahu saying, Israel's struggle is Venezuela's struggle, also begging him to come and invade with the IDF and free Venezuela. In any other country, that would be deemed treason. But in Venezuela, they allow her to roam out on the streets. They allow her to have this party and run these candidates. I mean, I don't take the Venezuelan leadership to be fools. I really don't. But I do think that they've been far too, lenient to trying to play ball with the Western rules. I don't think that they should continue to do that. And I had many discussions with Venezuelan leaders, over the past week and a half that I was there. I was with the foreign minister. I was with Alex Saab. I was got to speak to the president, of course. And I think that they are now at a turning point where they understand that as well. And they no longer are going to be trying to appease the West. I think they see full and well what's happening. They see the new multipolar world developing. They see BRICS membership in their near future in October. President Maduro just got invited to Kazan. I will be there in Kazan. I hope to score another interview with him and talk about his acceptance, his country's acceptance into the BRICS alignment. And, I don't see any reason why they should continue to try and appease the West when the West has done everything they can. They've tried to assassinate Maduro. They've tried to invade Venezuela. They placed 930 sanctions on the country. They stole Citgo, which is like a major, state oil resource. They stole the petrochemical company that they had in Colombia. Thank God Petro Gustavo gave it back. But, I mean, they've done everything they could to try and tear this country apart, and they still stand strong. It's beautiful.
It is, truly. Now, Gayatri, get the flight schedules for Kazan. All roads must lead to Kazan. Jackson, finally, you are one of the leaders and one of the founders of a new American party, the American Communist Party. Tell us about that and how it differs from other parties of the left already extant.
Well, the left in America really isn't left. It's liberals. I mean, these are the left mostly in America it's a dead political ideology. These are the sorts of figures you see trying to tear down the glorious statues of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson in the United States. These are the people who are pushing the agenda of George Soros, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, so on and so forth. Whether they're doing it knowingly or not, they're doing it. What we hope to achieve, and I think we will with this party, the American Communist Party, which you can find on Twitter at ACP Maine, is a party that's actually focused on unleashing the forces of production in the United States, bringing back manufacturing, redeveloping this country. You know, the United States is being outpaced by a factor of almost 2 times by China in manufacturing now. And we want to do this all in a way that's actually going to prioritize the needs of the people of this country. There's no reason why Bill Gates should be allowed to own all this land in America and all these resources, the oil, the gas, the whatever we have here, all of our resources. And the American people are out suffering on the streets, 600,000 homeless. We got hundreds of thousands of people dying of heart disease, cancer, obesity each and every year. It makes no sense to me. Our government is hell-bent on trying to govern us into debt. And we want to cancel the debt. We want to free America. We want to liberate the working class. And we're not going to get caught up in this woke gender, sexuality, all these politics that the liberals try to play today. No, we're about actually saving America and viewing multipolarity through the lens of communism, of Marxism, Leninism, which is unique. All these other liberal parties, they reject multipolarity. They say, we like some of the countries that are participating in BRICS, but we have problems with Russia. We have problems with China. No, the American Communist Party says that we want to be a nation amongst nations. We want to build a multipolar world with all of them. They're coming after us hard. We trended on Twitter for 5 days when we launched our announcement. Our Twitter blew up. Millions of views on Twitter, millions of views on Chinese social media as well. And just this week, a delegation of us went to Venezuela for the elections. And I will say this, there were CIA-backed Colombian terrorist mercenaries that tried to take me hostage while I was in Caracas. The State Department was aware of this. The U.S. Embassy in Bogota was aware of this. And they did nothing because those are their employees who are carrying out these acts of terror all across Venezuela and who tried to target me. So, like you, in the UK, we got to be careful. We got to be safe, but it's a common struggle. So thank you for bringing it up, and thank you for your words of encouragement on X. I really appreciate it.
Welcome. The best to you, Jackson Hinkle, always. My son from another father and mother, Jackson Hinkle, US-based political analyst and host of The Dive. Yusuf Al-Pfeiffer, that can't really be his name. Yusuf Al-Pfeiffer says, by the way, Rolf Harris was a migrant, George. Indeed, as soon as I said it, I realized. Now, we're going back to the UK riots, which are still going on this evening for a third night in a row with the activist and writer, Jackie Walker. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, like me, Jackie Walker was witch hunted out of the Labour Party, and I, for one, am glad to be out of it. 20 years now, 21 years I've been out of it. She, a little less long, but she has never stopped fighting for what she believes in. Jackie Walker, the activist and writer, joins me now on the mother of all talk shows. Jackie, thanks for coming on. These are very troubled times. They haven't reached London yet. We can't be certain that they won't, but in the northern towns that I know so well, the situation is very grim. Tens of thousands of people are living in fear and have every reason to doubt that the police, that the state will be able to protect them from marauding people who are attacking others purely and simply because of how they look, the colour of their skin. They say they're after Muslims, but they're attacking non-Muslim black people, they're attacking Sikhs, they're attacking anybody of colour. And it's now the third night of that. I'm not sure we've seen this before, at least not since the Notting Hill riots of the early 60s, but this is on a much bigger scale. What say you?
I think this is a phenomenon, but it is a phenomenon, I think, that many of us have predicted for quite a long time. I mean, those of us who've got our eyes open politically knew it was coming and what was coming. But what is extraordinary at this point is how quickly it has happened since Starmer became the Prime Minister. And what is stunning is his lack of response. And the fact that when it did come, 3 days really after it all kicked off, it was in a way so weak. He still can't really bring the words racism out of his mouth. He certainly can't use the word term Islamophobia, because he himself and his party and his spokespeople have been actually stoking this fire that threatens to consume so much of what we should find valuable about British culture.
It has been the most miserable performance. I mean, not since Liz Truss and the famous lettuce, which outlived her premiership, has there been a more unimpressive response to basically an unprecedented level of racialized violence, which then became terror with the fire that was started in the hotel in Rotherham. I mean, you would think that Starmer would at least have been advised to get on the television, not on the third night with his bags packed for his holiday and his mealy-mouthed monotone, which neither pacified the rioters, the racist thugs, nor reassured the people who are their victims.
I mean, this is when we see the true caliber of this person and his real lack of experience and the awfulness of the group of people who are advising him. They haven't got a clue. And they haven't got a clue about what they have started. Because, you know, what's happening now, quite rightly, is that many people in the minority communities, and this is not just about Muslims, by the way, are now saying we need to get organised to defend ourselves. And also, everything that we saw from the film that was going on in Rotherham and in other places seemed to show that the police were actually outnumbered. I mean, what is going on here? And you cannot believe that this would be happening if the actual focus wasn't people of colour and Muslims. There would have been something done, because what you have here on show is the structural racism, not just behind the political class, but the media class in Britain. So how it's being reported in Britain is this two-sidism, that you've got protesters on one side and protesters on another side. What you've got are fascists who are trying to burn people to death, who are smashing people's homes, who are smashing people's cars when their families are in it, who are beating up people and are stabbing people. That's what you have on one side. And on the other side, you have minorities who are the victims. And yet, the media is still reporting it as this two-sidism. It's totally, utterly shocking.
Actually, the BBC described it in a bulletin earlier this evening as pro-Britain protesters, which is a new twist on matters. You're too young to remember, of course, but I faced phalanxes of police during the miners' strike in 84, 85, much bigger police than we nowadays usually see. And my impression was the same as yours. Here are a few hundred thugs, we're not talking thousands for the most part, here are a few hundred thugs putting the police to flight, hurting the police, harming the police. Where are all the police? And if we don't have enough police to protect our communities, we bloody well better get far more of them very quickly indeed, or otherwise people will have to defend themselves. Then you will have two-sidedness. And then we're on the way to hell in a handcart, Jackie.
Totally. I'm afraid I'm not so young. I mean, I was in my 20s when the miners' strike was going on, and we were collecting money for the miners when I was a student. So I was kind of involved in that way. And I also remember, and I'm sure you remember, what happened at New Cross when the racists and fascists tried to walk down through my area, and they were seen off. Not by the police, by the way, not by the police at all, but by militant community anti-racists. And that is what's happening now. In fact, the protection of minorities and of communities is not really happening by the police. It's happening by communities coming together. But this is also complex, isn't it? Because I think this is also linked to what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Israel. I think it's what's happening and what's happened at parliamentary level. It is a huge, complex issue that's going on now. And we won't see the end of it, even if it was to finish in a day or two's time. Because as we know, another thing that some of us prophesied 4 years ago, I was saying that the black wall, what we call the black wall, would fall, i.e. the black vote that supports Labour would go. And in this election, we saw a third of minority voters not voting Labour. That is absolutely astonishing. And I think what we're going to see now is a real realignment in politics.
Well, this is all the product of what they used to call, now they're not so keen on calling it this, centrism, isn't it? It's the prevailing socio-economic and cultural outlook of a succession of centrist governments from John Major until this day. We have people who have left the north, the coastal communities, the abandoned towns, the run-down cities, places like Hull, places like Stoke, places like Rotherham. It's all dry tinder, Jackie, and all because of the failure of successive neoliberal governments, whatever party they claimed that they represented.
And it's carrying on now. I'm sure you, like I, felt almost sick when at the beginning of Parliament we saw the Labour and Tory leaders kind of congratulating each other because it was just a handover of power. In a way, we have a one-party state here, because economically they kind of agree, socially they kind of agree. All of their policies are pretty much the same. All that the Labour Party is doing is offering to give you conservative policies just a bit more efficiently. But what we did see in this election was their lowest popular vote for a government that's actually in power. And that's why I'm saying, I think given what's happening now so early, given what has happened recently with the withdrawal of the pensioners' fuel allowance, given what's going to go on financially when they continue these neoconservative monetary policies, I think we're going to have a very interesting next election and a realignment.
If we get there, unless the world blows up in between. Jackie Walker, writer and activist. Pleasure, an honour actually, to have you on the mother of all talk shows. Come back again soon. Now, the production team have looked through the DJE YouTube channel, but we can't find any videos at Marks and Spencer or anything like our caller referred to. I'm sure he just maybe got mixed up. He can, of course, find them himself and send them to us. It was Greg in Essex. Here somebody's telling me something now. Greg in Essex, not the Gregs that was looted by these patriots. They looted all the steak bakes in Greg's. Imagine. Sam is in Montreal, in Canada, but on the UK riots. What shame our country now stands in. We've got callers from America and Canada about riots in our country. On you go, Sam.
Thank you for having me, George. This is the second time I think I called in. I was called in a few weeks ago and mentioned how unpopular Trudeau was here, and you were surprised to hear it.
Yes, indeed, yes.
I was actually calling to relate something similar that's happening in Canada, and not necessarily I'll comment on what's happening in the UK. Hopefully this will enlighten some of your viewers, including those in Canada, because we are being grossly misinformed here. Everything I'm going to read, unlike your previous caller, Greg, is actually from Government of Canada websites. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Canada has granted nearly 1 million, to be exact, 962,612 as of April 1st, 2024, of what they call Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel, or CUAET. We've basically welcomed 1 million Ukrainians into Canada, and if your viewers are not familiar, Canada's population and Ukraine's population back in 2022, when the war started, were the same. 38 and 39 million respectively. Canada's population is now 41 million. We've taken in 2.65% of Ukraine's population. This has resulted in lots of problems here that are being misdirected away from the Ukrainians to immigrants, specifically foreign students. So the immigration minister is now blaming the excessive number of foreign students, despite the fact that their numbers have only increased by 250,000, not 1 million. And the vast majority of those students happen to be Indian, Chinese, and Iranian. So minorities. This is actually stoking...
it is bizarre, though, Sam, if you'll forgive me interrupting you. It is bizarre. You are all immigrants. Every single person in Canada is an immigrant. You've got the second biggest country in the world. It is empty. 39 million, 41 million in the second biggest country in the whole world. You could fit the whole world's population in Canada. And yet, as soon as it's Chinese, as soon as it's Indians, as soon as it's Iranians, the whole thing turns on its head. Last word to you, Sam.
Sorry, I apologize. I'll finish off very quickly. So this is actually stoking, as you're correct, I myself am an immigrant here, so this is not an anti-immigrant thing. I'm actually feeling the brunt of the anti-immigrant thing as a result of this. And I'm trying to set the record straight here about the Ukraine versus immigrant thing because, again, the government is misdirecting it. The name of the minister who's leading the misdirection, his name is Mark Miller. He also happens to be my local MP, and he has completely vacated his office since last October to avoid facing the Palestinian protesters. I'm assuming he's not going up for re-election.
He sounds just like a British Labour MP. Sam, sorry, I've got to hurry you on because of the hour. Jay is in Florida on somebody called Tommy Robinson, or otherwise known as. Go ahead, Jay.
Hey, George, good evening. Looks like they got you worked up into a froth tonight, huh?
What can I do? I'm watching people almost burning to death in a hotel. Gets me upset. What can I say?
Yeah, it's a little strange. I saw this. I called to talk to you about. I saw this Tommy Robinson. Never heard of him before. Didn't know who he was, and he was on his Jordan Peterson podcast with his wife.
Shame on Jordan Peterson. Shame on him.
Yeah, well, I can't say. He told his story, and he told about this British Defense League, and I don't know what to make of him one way or another, and I'm not going to get into that. But he looked.
He's a grifter. He's a diminutive. He's a diminutive, manipulative thief. He's a grifter. He's in Cyprus, lying by a swimming pool while England burns and Asian women cower in their houses. Old mosque men from the committees of mosques are barring their doors and standing behind them, not knowing when the flames are coming. Drivers are being stopped in the centre of Middlesbrough and only allowed to proceed if they are white English. They tell you on their video. You don't have to take my word for it. That's what they're saying on their video. So all of this is under the, if you like, aegis of little Tommy Robinson. Meanwhile, he's counting the money and sniffing the cocaine. Last word to you, Jay.
So, yeah, I did. That's what I was thinking, the same thing, the way he was running off in his mouth. And, he had great, huge sweat stains underneath his arms. And I just, I've seen people in this state before, and he was either on, you said coke, I was thinking speed, but yeah, he was a bit of a freak show. I'd like to offer my condolences.
I don't know the difference myself. I've never seen either, but I'm told that he's a cocaine man from this, in the same line as little Zelensky. It's a thing that little men do to make them seem or feel at least bigger. But here's the rub, Jay. Tommy Robinson is the property of the Israel lobby in Britain, in the United States, and in Canada. That's where his money comes from. They have paid all of his legal bills. He's never out of court, but he's never without a proper defense because it's paid for by the Israel lobby in your country and in mine. Cam 35mm says these protesters are just like the fascists in Odessa, burning people in buildings. That's exactly what I said on Twitter earlier this evening. This is a carbon copy of the burning to death of people in Odessa in 2014, inside the trade union house. The fire bombs were thrown through the windows. They could not get out, and they perished. They burned to death. Well, Odessa's one thing. I can't do much about that. I can't do much about the children burning to death in Gaza, though I'm doing my best to bring both to a speedy end. But I will not stay silent while it's happening in my own country. Little Carol says, I saw a Channel 4 clip of Asian men in Middlesbrough attacking the police and throwing objects. Just seen it on X, posted a couple of hours ago. Well, as I said in my monologue, in the absence of the state protecting the Asian and African and other minority communities in Britain, some of these communities, I didn't know Middlesbrough, but I did know Blackburn and I did know Bolton. These communities are coming together to protect themselves. And as I said in my monologue, I never called on them to do that. I didn't want them to do that. That real serious trouble, like civil war trouble, can arise from significant groups of opposing young men, mainly young men, on the streets of Britain. No peace can come of that. No order can be restored by that. I said that in my monologue. But what would you do if it was your community that was in terror, flames spreading, no sign of any law and order response that can keep you safe? What would you do? You'd hope that your father, your brothers, would go outside and make sure that what happened in the Holiday Inn in Rotherham didn't happen to you in your own home. Deborah is in Blackpool. Go ahead, Deborah.
Hi, George. You took the words right out of my mouth before.
Tell me.
Well, there's been a punk week in Blackpool, and the riot squad and everything were out yesterday. Yes. Well, I wasn't in town. I was watching it via social media, and they had the whole Metropole Hotel, and that was all surrounded round by the cenotaph by North Pier, George. And as usual, it was the young, drunken mobs, you know, just running up, bawling and shouting at the police and chanting, "Oh, Tommy, Tommy Robinson." But as I've previously said, that demonstration that he done, he replayed that supposed documentary he made going on about Asian Pakistani grooming gangs. And I said to my partner, you know, let's get it right. Most of the things that I've seen, when it's a paedophile hunters, where's the whites getting mentioned in this? You know, what about all the ones
It's funny, none of them were
Parliament?
outside the court for Shue Edwards, Deborah. Shue Edwards, Britain's most prominent broadcaster, was making indecent images of 6- and 7-year-old boys in sexual activity. Disgusting pervert. Where was Tommy Robinson and his mob outside the court for that? These people don't give a damn about children. Not a damn. They don't give a toss about children. Debs, I've got to go because of the hour. Let me go to Bobby in London. Go on, Bobby.
Hi, George. Nice talking to you again. Let me first begin to say, put your sleeve up and become the Prime Minister. Because the British people, they don't want Keir Starmer and his henchmen like Yvette Cooper and David Lammy. They need to go, George.
Well, I don't know if they don't want them, Bobby, but those three people will not do them any good at all. I mean, if this is Britain's leadership, God help us, Bob. We're going down the plug hole.
The other point I'm going to make it very quickly, George, is about the Middle East. Probably you know that, but many people, they don't know that. The Middle East belongs to the people called Sham, which is made with Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And I am saying to the people of Sham, Libya, Iraq, and Lebanon, America is there. Don't frighten of America, because they are coward, and you will beat them. And there is no time America went and invaded any country in the Middle East or Africa, and they won. So don't be frightened of America. You're going to beat them. This is your country.
Well, the American Marines have a very unfortunate history in Lebanon. Of course, these young Marines that have now been sent there, 4,000 of them, will have no idea what happened to generations of Marines before them on the shores of Lebanon. No good will come of American involvement in the coming war, which is literally about to start, just as we go off air, I'll warrant. No good will come of American involvement in that conflict. And American blood will be spilled, American treasure will be burned, American assets will be destroyed, and the prestige of America will sink still further under the waves. Bobby, thanks for the call. I've got my good wife next to me, by the grace of God. Gayatri, what's rattling?
There's a lot. There's a lot. Riots. People are calling in from all over to talk about what's been happening in the UK. Stephanie Carroll says, these groups are scary and dangerous indeed, but I blame the war-making governments of the UK and US and their lackeys in the mainstream medias for the seeds of anti-Islam sentiments. The old divide and rule tactic is working, and these disaffected youth, those are falling for it, blaming the immigrants rather than their governments for abandoning them. Maybe the government doesn't like the extreme degree to which these groups are taking things, but they created this monster by neglecting the needs of their people and creating a bogeyman to hate and bomb.
It's a Frankenstein monster,
it's
that's
a Frankenstein monster.
And we got the early sign of it, misunderstood by Bryce Greene. With the Brexit vote, 17.4 million people wanted out of the European Union because they did not want the literally unlimited, or limited only by the population of the European Union, 350 million people at that point. They did not want these people moving to Britain to compete with them for jobs, for houses, for school places, doctor's appointments, and the rest. We got that early sign of alienation, of rejection of the state, of the system in the Brexit referendum. We got it again on the 4th of July in the general election, when only 19% of the people of the country voted for the party, which is now our government, with all power, with the lowest Labour share of the vote in history, the worst Labour performance in history. So we've got lots of signs.
You've got lots of signs
of how angry people are, how alienated they are, and the Frankenstein monster is the whipping up of hatred against Muslims abroad. I mean, I've said this for 25 years now. If you go telling your people every day and night that the Muslim world is ruled by madmen, enemies, fanatics, we've got to fight them, we've got to make war on them, how can you say, but Johnny that runs the street corner store, he's all right, Johnny Muslim, in the street corner of Rotherham, don't bother him. That's not how it works.
Exactly, and I don't know if you saw some of those tweets gathering all those headlines from the likes of Daily Mails and Sun, and it's shocking, you know, if you pile them all up, the hatred that they spewed or they try to, the message they try to give. So X therefore asks, do you agree with Starmer then that all of these rioters in the streets now are neo-Nazis, aka right-wing thugs, rather than angry working class people who have legitimate grievances? We need a leader with a strategy which might work to stop the boats and improve the lives of people in this crumbling society.
Yeah,
maybe we need a British equivalent of Gandhi.
Well, Gandhi won't cut much ice on the streets of Stoke, I'm afraid. Although that's what you call a concern troll, that tweet, of course there is some element of truth to it. First of all, Keir Starmer didn't say they were neo-Nazis. Matter of fact, he was oddly unspecific about what they were. But actually, most of them are just angry, poor, hopeless, alienated people. They are being manipulated by fascists, for sure. Their actions are fascistic actions, for sure. Only a fascist burns civilians alive in a hotel. I'm sorry, that's the action of a fascist. But that doesn't mean these people, and they are hundreds, many hundreds, but they're not many thousands. Never confuse the hundreds with the thousands with the millions.
Yes.
Never confuse these things. They are emblematic of the bitterness and alienation that comes with deindustrialization, with austerity, with the disappearance of all that we once had and wanted to have, and that our forefathers fought for. The disappearance of all these things has led to an angry, white, alienated working class and sub-working class, lumpen proletariat. And that is the dry tinder that I was talking about.
It is exactly that. And because all the money that was meant to be invested in this country is spent on wars abroad instead, causing the vicious
cycle.
cycle.
To Zelensky. We gave Zelensky $4 billion.
We did, yes.
At the same time, we cut the old people's heating allowance.
You did. So on the back of all these riots, we resurfaced the documentary that you made quite some years ago. It was in 2016, called The Patriot Game. That was when you made a mini documentary about the far right movement in Britain. So it goes into a bit of history of this. And Stephen Lee, he says, shockingly still relevant film 8 years on. As the American playwright Eugene O'Neill said, there is no such thing as the present or the future. There's just the past repeating itself again and again. We should have a look at it again. I mean, it was very interesting.
Can we show it again? How long does it last?
Very short, so an hour, I think. We've got Professor Matthew Goodwin in it, Lee Jasper, and Martin Webster.
Maybe we can just encourage people to go to it.
It's on YouTube. Sharing the link now in the chat. This is a very good one from Robin Hansman. You'll like this one. It took me some time to realize that I had been programmed by news and films about cowboys and Indians, James Bond, etc., to believe that we are the goodies. Only in later life have I come to realize that the rulers of the countries of my birth, one of the greatest colonial imperialist pirating powers in existence, are actually the baddies. Rule Britannia was a song we were all sold before we had time and maturity to evaluate.
That's true, yeah.
You were quite the opposite, weren't you?
I was always with the Indians rather than the cowboys, and being of Irish background, I was always with the colonized rather than the colonizer, so I was lucky in that regard. But I know there's a lot of people who've been misled in the country, and there isn't any practical point in condemning them for that.
No.
What we must try and do is win them to a proper understanding of where and how things are. Last one, Gayatri?
Yeah, let me just quickly go to the poll, which was about the Olympics. Here we are again, but it's about the trans athletes, whether they should be allowed to compete as women. Rajendra Patel says, the centrists love that people are distracted from the real issues and discussing trans people. And Jason Cook says, Iman Khalif has a womb. Now, this is the Algerian boxer that kind of started this whole row, basically. But he says she can have children, no more to be said about her. The more concerning issue is how she was allowed to be slandered across the world before the IOC spoke out to support her.
She sues, actually.
And I hope, well, that's what we're saying. And J.K. Rowling in particular, she went all out on her. So
against her.
She might be in a bit of trouble over it.
Well, she's got money. I advised the athlete to sue, and if she'd like some direction to a good lawyer, I know a good libel lawyer. I should do. Collected millions for me over the decades. Thanks, Gayatri. I'll take you for chips afterwards. Well, rather, we'll just have chips. I'm not taking you out at this time of night. Let's go back to the lines. Time's running out. Stephen in Blackpool wants to talk about, well, us, MOATS, I think. Stephen, go ahead.
Hi, George. Thanks for taking my phone call. I know it's late at night and you're about to go off the air. I just want to say thank you for everything that you do. your honesty, your humbleness, and you're such a good guy. You know, I listened to you in 2-3 with your anti-war with the Blair in Central Park, Wallasey, in the Angel Eagle seat, I think it was. And
oh yes, I remember that. Somebody threw an egg at me, if you recall.
Yeah, well,
they threw an egg at me, but I was rather pleased about how I bobbed and weaved, and they missed.
Yeah, I'll give you that one. But anyway, I just wanted to say, since watching you on RT, you and Gayatri, with, you know, when you're doing your Sputnik, some of the topics you've let me investigate, your Chomsky, Cornell West, all the rest of them, I just want to say thank you once again for being such a good guy, and I hope you and your family are safe. Just please be careful. There's so many crazy people out there, so just be careful. God bless.
God bless you, Stephen. Very touching and lovely phone call. But the last call of the night must go to the legend. That is Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I just wanted to say, in a way, how proud I was for Bristol last night, because Carla Denlip, she's the Green MP for Bristol Central, had warned what was going to happen, and she encouraged people to come out to stop these fascists. And first of all, they were at Castle Park, which is a big area, and they completely, there were loads of really good people, completely outnumbered these subs, and you know, they eventually sort of went away without too much police presence. Anyway, as you well know, the next thing was this Mercure Hotel, which I live very near, actually, and they do house asylum seekers, and many good people. They made this big chain right across the front of the hotel, and the police were there, but they dispersed quite quickly, and I was quite proud of Bristol. I know later on, unfortunately, there was into the night a bit more trouble, but basically, it was, you know, I was quite proud of Bristol, really.
Well, I have many friends in Bristol, not just you, but two people who are putting this show out tonight, and I'm very proud of them too, and as I am of you. It was an ugly scene that was averted in Bristol, and hats off to the local MP for calling people out to defend the communities. Bristol is very much a multiracial, multicultural place, and is the stronger, I think, for that. Bristol is a fine city in which to live precisely because of that. You see, the thing is, Norma, you and I, we knew Britain when it was virtually all white, when a night out, a dinner in a restaurant was fish, chips and peas, tea, bread and butter, where Billy Fury was the local talent, Billy J. Kramer. We have seen how Britain has transformed. And as I've said twice already tonight, if it hadn't transformed, the England football team would have been on the plane home from the Euros after the first round. It is the black players, and in the future black and Asian players playing for England, that saved the country's bacon. And every team in the country, every team in the Premiership, and every team in England has multiple black players in it. And some of these racist thugs like these players. That's one of many paradoxes
I know.
that are in this situation. Last word to you, Norm.
Oh, well, do you know what? I actually think my sell-by date's running out, George. But anyway, the biggest thing I was going to say is I actually worry so much that it is developing into what I call a bit of terrorism. I know there are words, but, you know, that's what I think.
No, it is. You're right. The attack on the hotel in Rotherham was arson with intent. to kill. It was a catastrophe narrowly averted by the actions of the police and the fire brigade. That's why I've been talking about both of them this evening. Thanks, Norma. The act of arson with intent is an act of terrorism because it is being done for a political purpose. That's the definition of terrorism. So where are the anti-terrorism squad? Why are these poor bobbies being outnumbered on the street by a few hundred thugs? If they were miners, they wouldn't be outnumbered. If they were print workers back at Wapping, they wouldn't have been outnumbered. I'm absolutely sure of that. Now, our governments, mainly the governments of Theresa May and Boris Johnson, have steadily reduced police numbers and the presence of the police in the community, closure of police stations, and so on, all to make a capital gain on the property. I'm just hearing, as we go off here, another hotel is currently surrounded by hundreds of protesters in Tamworth. Windows are being broken and the police seem overwhelmed. There you go. Just exactly what I've been talking about. Now let me reprise in 60 seconds. It's fine to be opposed to mass immigration. I am myself opposed to it. It's fine to think that our asylum system is not fit for purpose. There's no legal route to apply for asylum in Britain and to put people up in hotels in the centre of cities and towns when there are people living lives which are even more difficult. Ex-servicemen on the street, poor people who can't pay their electric bills, and so on, is an accident waiting to happen. But Britain has to take its share of refugees. Every country does. We have to. It's just there's no legal way for them to get here, so they come illegally. But we have to take our share of refugees, not least because our governments have helped to create the mass influx of refugees spilling around the world in desperate circumstances. And 0.18% of our population as refugees is not an excessive number, as many other countries, like Greece, like Germany, like Spain, could testify to you. 0.18% is not our fair share. Wherever they should be housed, however they came here, that's one matter. But as I said at the beginning, what is not negotiable is that any person in this island, whatever their colour, however they got here, whenever they got here, what colour they are, however they pray, none of these things can be allowed to transgress the right of every human being on this island to be treated equally. Equally before the law, equally protected by the law, and equally able to enjoy the right to worship as they see fit, to live as human beings, however long they are in this country for. That's not negotiable. That's the difference between my views, the Workers' Party's views, and the views of some of those, at least, who've been caught on their own videos, evincing evil words of intention and of racial and religious hatred. Up with that, we, at the mother of all talk shows, will not put. I'll be back on Tuesday night with Have It Out with Galloway, and I hope that you join me. If you want to be on the show, email me, haveitoutwithgalloway RaceRiot.com. And I'll be back, God willing, on Wednesday with the midweek edition of the mother of all talk shows, by which time, I promise you, the whole Middle East will be at war. Stay tuned, stay safe.